Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. The program that you're about to watch was filmed in the Caribbean aboard the New Amsterdam during the National Review post-election cruise. That is just a few days after the election of November 2012. Uncommon Knowledge, a production of the Hoover Institution, today at sea with National Review. He served in the State Department, the executive branch, the United States Senate, the legislative branch, and the federal bench, the judicial branch. Today on Uncommon Knowledge, taping at sea with National Review, James Buckley, Hat Trick. Welcome to Uncommon Knowledge. I'm Peter Robinson. Born in New York City in 1923, James Buckley grew up in rural Connecticut. He graduated from Yale, served during the Second World War as a naval officer, then returned to Yale to earn his law degree. In 1970, he was elected to the United States Senate from New York. He served one term. During the Reagan administration, he served as Undersecretary of State and as President of Radio Free Europe, and was then appointed to the U.S. Court of Appeals for the District of Columbia. Mr. Buckley retired from the bench in 2000. In 2010, Senator Buckley published a collection of essays, Freedom at Risk. I should note that as we tape this during a National Review cruise, Mr. Buckley is the brother of the founder of National Review, William F. Buckley, Jr., and of the longtime managing editor of National Review, the late Priscilla Buckley. Bill Buckley used to refer to James Buckley as his sainted brother, a designation that no one who has ever known James Buckley has ever had any occasion to disagree with. Senator Buckley, welcome to Uncommon Knowledge.
Thank you.
From your book, Liberty at Risk, you tell the story that when you ran against Pat Moynihan for the Senate in 1976, he defeated you, alas, and went on to serve 4 terms, as I recall?
I think so, yes.
Also alas, 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 alas. He accused you of being stuck in the 18th century. And you write in Freedom at Risk, quote, "I confessed that I was guilty and totally committed to the values and principles embedded in the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. The question is whether those 18th century values remain relevant." Do they?
They do. They do. The thing that was remarkable about the founding generation was that they were students of history. You had Madison, who asked Jefferson to send 200 books carefully selected from France and got them back. And he and others in that founding generation developed an intimate knowledge of every experiment in human freedom that had been recorded. And they understood that there is one constant in human affairs, and that is human nature. And they understood that the thirst for power, whether exercised by a despot or by a parliamentary majority, was the ultimate destroyer of free institutions. And so they constructed the Constitution in a manner to try to keep the thirst for power at bay, separation of powers, and of course the principle of federalism.
Now, while we're on the founders, what about the question of religion in their lives and in the founding documents? The Declaration mentions God, or the Creator, I should say. The Constitution does not. The late Christopher Hitchens used to insist that these documents were both thoroughly secular. Thomas Jefferson, of course, was a deist at best. He's famous for producing his own personal edition of the Bible, from which he simply deleted all the miracles. But is this a necessarily religious worldview that produced the Declaration and the Constitution, or not?
I believe there was a specific, not necessarily a Christian point of view, but a religious point of view, as you see in the opening words of the Declaration of Independence, speaking about our unalienable right to life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. And that unalienable right was derived from our Creator. In other words, this is something that was inherent in the human being, not granted by government. And it was therefore the duty of government to protect that right.
It's a declaration about the nature of reality. That is to say, I'm fumbling here, but somehow or other, the deep structure of reality that precedes the creation of any government. There is a creator, there are rights. You have to take a sphere of liberty for the individual as something that it's not just a notional construct, but they really believed somehow it existed.
They understood that there was a need for government, but it had to be derived from the consent of the governed. So the individual is in charge, not the government in charge of the individuals. Or to cite a recent statement, we don't belong to government.
Right.
Government belongs to us. But getting back to religion, even though the Constitution, which was talking about the mechanics of government, makes no mention of religion, throughout the writings and statements of that same generation was this thesis. A free society depended on responsible individuals. Responsible individuals derived their understanding of right and wrong from religion. And therefore, if they stopped being religious, it undercut the whole basis for responsible government.
Once again, from Freedom at Risk, you write, the founders understood that the preservation of our liberties, this is the point you were just making, the founders understood that the preservation of our liberties ultimately depended on the American people's continuing exercise of what was then referred to as Republican virtue, the subordination of personal advantage to the public good, close quote. Now, isn't that just what present-day liberals insist upon? And isn't it the case that Mitt Romney wanted to use government to provide tax cuts for the rich? Isn't it the
course,
case?
Yes.
It is? It is?
No.
How are we to understand Republican virtue today?
That you can't be bribed by the promise of federal goods. You have to take the welfare of the nation as a whole and cast your vote and decide what your priorities are based not on the advantage that you will be securing from this program or that, but the welfare of the nation as a whole.
Well, how would you address someone who just voted for the tax increase in California, Prop 30? I'm sensitive to this because as I live in California now, who voted for it by saying, well, it's a form of generosity toward children, the money for schools and for the needy. And so how do you address the argument that it is virtuous to expand the state and raise tax rates to help those in need?
Well, it depends on whether you believe that, well, first of all, I think that most people believe in a safety net. The people who are, through bad luck or bad judgment, they cannot have the minimum requirements for a decent life as society understands it. And so this is an area where I don't think a few people object to government moving in. Private charity doesn't necessarily do the trick. But once you get beyond that, then the question is, okay, this program sounds wonderful. We're going to raise in California zillions of more dollars because that's going to improve education for everybody, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Then you start asking the question of competence. Is government the best instrument for achieving those objectives, or should we rely on the private sector, private initiative, the marketplace incentives, the marketplace's ability to weed out losers, the competition and all of that has meant historically in terms of raising inventiveness, rewarding initiative, rewarding risk, and meeting people's, the marketplace's demands.
All right. In Freedom at Risk, you write, in 1935, at the outset of the New Deal, the U.S. Code, this is a collection of federal statutory law, the U.S. Code consisted of a single volume containing 2,275 pages of statutes. That's from the founding of the nation to 1935. Today, the code consists of 30 volumes. You just laid out the founding principles, the importance of Republican virtue, which means resist the impulse to bribe your fellow citizen or to accept bribes from the federal government. And you've just laid out a very reasonable rationale for asking where government is competent and where it is not. And both Republican virtue and that rationale seem to have been in effect for about a century and a half. And then something happened. What happened?
A, the New Deal. B, most particularly the Lyndon Johnson administration. That's when you really had the explosion. And then people got into the habit of expecting Congress to address just every problem and forget about federalism. And one of the things that has totally exploded is the practice of having grants and aid programs in which, in effect, Congress bribes the state by returning money taxed from individuals living in states and returning it to the states. It's in 30% support or 40% of support, whatever, loaded down with rules, guidelines, regulations that impede the ability of the states to respond to local conditions in imaginative ways to solve local problems. And this has been one of the trends that was triggered under the Lyndon Johnson administration.
And by the time I came along, the New Deal had been enacted. But you came along beforehand. Now, of course, you were a boy.
Right. Mm-hmm.
But if you look back, can you, looking over the course of your life, can you sense changes? Mm-hmm. I guess what I'm asking is, did the expansion of government habituate us to an ever-expanding government? Or was there some change, was there some loss of Republican virtue that made possible the expansion of government? Which came first?
Well, first of all, I just want to say that growing up, if you asked what is the characteristic of the American system, the phrase was, that government is best that governs least. Now, when did we lose sight of that?
Right.
I'm not a historian. I don't know when the chemistry of the American people changed. I think it happened slowly and gradually, and people incrementally got used to government doing different things. And I think once this grants and aids approach became acceptable, then members of Congress found extraordinary incentives in the terms of pork. This is the ideal vehicle for pork. That more and more of these programs were created, and people kind of, the center of gravity moved from state capitals to the national capitals for the handling of purely local problems and state problems.
Right. In Freedom at Risk, you write, the question before us is whether transforming the federal government into a European-style administrative state will lead to a better life for most Americans, close quote. Now, in Germany, for example, as best I can tell, the administrative state, the welfare state, actually has nearly total public support. It's a way of life. They take it for granted. They can't understand why Americans have taken as long as they seem to have done to enact some sort of universal health care. Mm-hmm. So maybe it is better. What do you think?
Well, it's a matter of judgment. Obviously, the Europeans would disagree with us. But there's one thing I found when I was in the State Department is how fundamentally different Americans are from Europeans. We see a problem, and it is our instinct as individuals and as groups to say, how do we solve it, and how do we find different approaches to it? The European ones is, how can government solve it, not how we ourselves. I was, when I was Undersecretary of State for Security Assistance, one of the jobs that I had to do was to try to persuade Europeans, the Germans, the British, and the French, to cooperate with the Reagan administration in making it difficult for the Soviet Union to earn money. And engaged in trade with the Western European nations. And they saw no reason not to continue to trade in ways helpful to the Soviet Union and thereby strengthen their ability to build up the armors and the missiles and all the rest of it that the Europeans at the same time were trying to defend themselves against, admittedly not in the same question as we were.
And did that prove they were crazy, or that they were extremely shrewd about playing the Soviets off against us? Make money on the Soviets and let the Americans defend us.
They were thinking about, I think, no, it was nothing sinister. It's just we didn't want to interfere with trade.
I see.
Because, yes, we're making money out of it.
I see. I see. All right.
But I just wanted to illustrate there is a different point of view. And I was in private business for about 17 years before getting to the Senate. And I would have to deal, and I did a lot of traveling, and I deal with South American lawyers and European lawyers, and it was that those lawyers, their reaction to if you ran into a problem is, you can do it or you can't do it. The law doesn't allow you to do it. An American lawyer will say, well, look, there's nothing immoral about what we want to do. There must be a way in which we can manage to get done something sensible.
Right.
And so it was a creative instinct that I just don't think exists in the same intensity abroad.
This brings us up to the present moment. Again, you wrote this book in 2010. Mm-hmm. Quote, the excesses of the Obama administration may have turned the heat up enough to ignite a public rebellion. Mm-hmm. Now, in the midterm election of 2010, mm-hmm. you got a public rebellion.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And in the presidential election of 2012, Senator, what happened?
I don't know.
You don't know.
I was hoping, when I put that together, that the Tea Party would continue to be able to excite the people the necessity to worry about the future, to worry about our ability to reduce spending, to get control over the entitlements and bring them down to reason. But it didn't happen. You can tell me why.
No, I can't.
No.
I've known you long, never well, alas, but I've known you enough over the years to know that cheerfulness is just part of the way you are as a human being. But a great deal of what seems to be coming toward us over the next 4 years, the gradual rolling out of Obamacare, seems to be irreversible. We have no instance of the welfare state in Europe having been rolled back to any great extent. Even Margaret Thatcher, during her...
It's going to happen in Greece overnight, don't you know?
Do you think? No, I mean, is a catastrophe the way out?
No.
No, all right. Well, so, and you spoke about this, the particular American genius. Do you see the character of the American people changing? Does that worry you? How blithe are you and how worried are you?
Well, people of my age are traditionally supposed to be down on everything.
Yes.
I like to think of myself as an optimist, but intellectually, I think it's going to be very, very hard to reverse the trend we are on. It's not merely that people are being bribed, but too many people have come to depend. I read a while ago, growing up, you were drilled into your head that you got to save for your old age. A little while ago, I saw statistics saying that people 50 years old and older had an average savings of less than $50,000. Well, these people, if that's true, then how do you control?
And they'll all live to be 103 with current
Exactly.
Yes.
So that's one of the concerns is that they're locked into the present situation. And of course, over the next 4 years, you're going to have We know the nature of the House of Representatives. We didn't get a majority in the Senate.
Lost seats.
We lost seats, but there is a presidential veto. So I don't see how you crawl out of what we're in.
All right, let's double the watch on the promenade. If you hear any loud splashes, throw in a lifesaver immediately. We need every conservative.
Now, I hope I'm wrong, of course.
May I ask you to read two quotations? In Freedom at Risk, you write, "I am haunted by Edward Gibbon's description of the demise of democracy in ancient Athens." Here is Gibbons on the demise of ancient Athens. Would you read that for everyone, please?
I don't have his accent, but in the end, more than they wanted freedom, they wanted security. They wanted a comfortable life, and they lost it all: security, comfort, and freedom. When the Athenians finally wanted not to give to society, but for society to give to them, when the freedom they wished for was freedom from responsibility, then Athens ceased to be free and was never free again.
Well, is that where we're headed?
I hope not.
But you find it difficult to resist as an argument?
I think it's a very cautionary statement for us to
All right.
keep in mind.
Here is the second quotation I'd like to ask you to read and comment on. This is from your little brother, William F. Buckley Jr., in 1960, addressing a rally in Carnegie Hall to protest the visit to the United States of the Soviet Premier, Nikita Khrushchev.
Ladies and gentlemen, we deem it the central revelation of Western experience that man cannot ineradicably stain himself, for the wells of regeneration are infinitely deep. No man is ever truly lost, no nation is irrevocably dishonored. Khrushchev cannot take permanent advantage of our temporary disadvantage, for it is the West he is fighting, and in the West there lie, however insisted, the ultimate resources which are moral in nature. Even out of the depths of despair, we take heart in the knowledge that it cannot matter how deep we fall, for there is always hope. Well, he was younger then.
So you take Gibbons over Buckley in the current circumstance?
I think so. I think there's a point where we cannot recapture those habits of mind, those habits of personal responsibility that are essential to the preservation of free societies.
All right, then let me ask you, I have children, you have grandchildren. If one's best analysis is that things are slipping away from us, that public life is slipping away from us, what does one say to one's grandchildren or children about leading a virtuous life? Do we withdraw from public life? Do we continue at some point you'd say that redirect your energies to your family, to your personal achievement? How do you explain the well-lived life in the current circumstance?
Other than finding a Caribbean island to move to.
I'm thinking we should invade Cuba. Just turn the boat.
No, but you can't. There are things that you're locked into in any worthwhile life. You got to live a virtuous life, and that includes virtuous in your public life and in whatever you can do. The holding action. Proving my brother Bill was right ultimately. You can't give up, but...
that's a kind of house rule. You are not permitted to despair.
You're not permitted to despair. Well, you can despair privately, but no, it's going to be an extraordinary challenge for them. And, but there are certain realities that are going to be faced if the debt goes off on the trajectory it's currently on, in terms of devastating and destroying the economic basis of the country. No, my grandchildren are going to face some problems that I never dreamed of and you never dreamed of. But nevertheless, insofar as they pay any attention to any advice I might give them, it would be you've got responsibilities, and not only to yourself and your family, but to the public.
Could I know you're talking to somebody who's sliding well into the second half of middle age. And I know you well enough to know that you believe that every bit of life is useful. Mm-hmm. Now, you've begun losing those who are dear to you, most recently your sister, to whom you dedicate this book. My sister and oldest friend, Priscilla Buckley. What are the consolations and uses of older years? I'm making notes. I intend to pull out the envelope in about 10 years.
There's supposed to be something called memory, but some people have better memories than others. My wife and I sort of talked about our golden years, and there is a porch and the two rocking chairs, and we rock back and forth, exchanging those wonderful whatevers, but neither one of us had any memory for anecdote. So what else do you do? Well, read good books, listen to nice music. There is a temptation at a certain age when you can't do anything useful, and that is to decide never to read a newspaper again or look at a television or a radio news show.
You have no appetite to tweet?
No. Nor do my thumbs, I don't think, would work that well.
Final question. Naval officer during the Second World War, senator, undersecretary of state, federal judge. You were in private business for 17 years. Mm-hmm. Aside from that, you served the nation. Mm-hmm. Can you compress into a sentence or two what you want your grandchildren to understand about this nation? Why you believed it was worth your principal life's energies?
Mm-hmm. Well, it was interesting. How about that?
Better than rocking?
The opportunities were there, and with the dull. I had a hard time keeping a job. I had to find something else to do. What do I tell my grandchildren? Well, find something that interests you, that interests your mind, something where you think your efforts go beyond yourself. Be prepared for lots of disappointments, such as Daniel Patrick Moynihan coming along at an inopportune time. And live don't expect an easy life. Mm. And don't be discouraged by upsets and adversities. Live through them and stick by your standards. Stick by your standards and keep a sense of humor.
Stick by your standards and keep a sense of humor. James Buckley, thank you. For Uncommon Knowledge at Sea with National Review, I'm Peter Robinson.